What if I told you the scariest villain in your favorite movie wasn't even a person, it was a car? Think about it. Some of cinema's most unforgettable bad guys didn't need guns, gadgets, or even long monologues. All they needed was a machine, cold steel, burning rubber, and an engine that seemed almost alive. From haunted classics to muscle monsters and exotic supercars, these rides didn't just carry villains, they became villains. And today, we're counting down the most unforgettable bad guy cars in movie history. Some were terrifying because of what they did on screen. Others became iconic simply because of who sat behind the wheel, and a few, well, they were so sinister they almost upstaged the entire movie. Stick around because number 7 will absolutely leave your jaw on the floor. And if you're a fan of movie vehicles and cinematic legends, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a ride through film history. Our list has to start with the queen of evil cars, Christine. This wasn't just a villain driving a car, the car itself was the villain. A 1958 Plymouth Fury, drenched in blood-red paint and possessed with a mind of its own. Stephen King imagined her as more than just metal and chrome. She was obsession, jealousy, and violence on four wheels. In the movie adaptation, Christine wasn't just scary because she could drive on her own. She was terrifying because she changed her owner. A shy, awkward teenager suddenly turned cruel, confident, and dangerously violent. All because of this car, Christine didn't just kill people, she consumed them. And the imagery stuck with audiences, those glowing headlights in the dark, the haunting sound of her radio turning on by itself, the way she could literally rebuild herself after being destroyed. Christine wasn't just a movie prop, she was a character and one of the few times in film history where a car was the monster. But Christine's horror came from the supernatural, our next villain car? It was terrifying because of the human behind the wheel. If Christine was pure supernatural terror, Stuntman Mike's Chevy Nova in Death Proof was pure, human-made evil. At first glance, it didn't look like much. A 1971 Chevy Nova, beat up, stripped down, matte black. The kind of car you'd walk past in a parking lot without even noticing. But in Quentin Tarantino's hands, that ordinary Nova became a rolling execution chamber. Stuntman Mike, played with eerie calm by Kurt Russell, had one obsession: killing women in staged car crashes, and this Nova was his weapon of choice. Reinforced with a death-proof cage around the driver's seat, Mike used the car like a battering ram, smashing into his victims at full speed. The scariest part wasn't just the violence, it was how believable it felt. No glowing headlights, no supernatural powers, just a disturbed man and a machine built for destruction. The Nova was stripped of style, stripped of flash, and stripped of humanity, which made it even more terrifying. But while Stuntman Mike's Nova was terrifying in its simplicity, some villain cars went in the opposite direction. Big, bold, ridiculous, and unforgettable. Some villain cars don't need to be fast, they don't even need to be scary. Sometimes they're unforgettable simply because they're outrageous. Case in point, the 1977 Cadillac Fleetwood from Escape from New York. This wasn't just a car, it was a rolling throne for the Duke of New York, played by the legendary Isaac Hayes. And it wasn't subtle, the Duke's Fleetwood came decked out with hood-mounted chandeliers. Yes, actual chandeliers, glowing as the car prowled through the ruined streets of Manhattan. It looked ridiculous, but that was the point. In a city turned into a prison, the Duke needed a car that screamed power, intimidation, and pure excess. The Fleetwood wasn't fast, but it didn't need to be. It was a statement, a villain's ego made of steel and crystal. And it proved something important in cinema: a bad guy's car doesn't always have to be scary. Sometimes it just has to be unforgettable. But if the Duke's Cadillac was all about style, our next villain car was the opposite: cold, clinical, and terrifying because of how real it felt. If the Duke's Cadillac was all show, the BMW M5 in Ronin was all business. John Frankenheimer's 1998 thriller is famous for its car chases, raw, unpolished, and brutally realistic. And at the heart of one of the greatest chase sequences ever filmed was a black BMW M5 E34. No CGI, no flashy tricks, just real cars, real drivers, and pure chaos on the streets of Paris. What made the M5 so menacing wasn't just its power, it was its precision. This was the car of professionals, cold, calculating criminals who didn't need chandeliers or flashy paint jobs. The M5 was quiet intimidation, evolved in business attire. As bullets flew and cars slammed into walls, the M5 held its ground, proving that sometimes the most terrifying villain car is the one that feels the most real. No supernatural evil, no cartoonish excess, just a machine built for speed, control, and dominance. But while the BMW showed us the cold, calculated side of villain cars, our next entry proves that sometimes villains want chaos. Exotic, unstable, and dangerous chaos. If the BMW M5 in Ronin was cold precision, the TVR Tuscan in Swordfish was the exact opposite: exotic, unpredictable, and dangerously unstable. In the early 2000s, hardly anyone outside of hardcore car fans had even seen a TVR in real life. It wasn't a Ferrari, it wasn't a Lamborghini. It was Stranger, a British supercar with wild curves, a screaming straight-six engine, and absolutely no electronic safety systems to save you if things went wrong. Which made it the perfect villain car. In Swordfish, John Travolta's character embodied chaos and extravagance. The Tuscan wasn't just his car, it was a reflection of his personality. Rare, risky, beautiful, but deadly if you didn't respect it. Just like him. The Tuscan's presence on screen was brief, but it stuck with audiences. It showed that sometimes a villain doesn't need the most famous car in the world to make a statement. All they need is something exotic enough to make you stop and stare. And wonder what kind of person would dare drive it. But some villain cars don't need exotic styling or rarity. Sometimes, the scariest thing on screen is just a massive hunk of steel bearing down on you. With no face, no humanity, and no way to stop it. Not every villain needs a luxury car or a muscle machine. Sometimes, all it takes is a truck, a massive, filthy, unstoppable truck. Steven Spielberg proved that in 1971 with Duel, his very first feature-length film. The villain wasn't a man with a face. In fact, we never even saw the driver. The true monster was the Peterbilt 281 tanker truck, bearing down on a terrified salesman in a Plymouth Valiant. The brilliance of Duel was its simplicity. The truck wasn't supernatural. It didn't talk, it didn't glow red in the dark. It was just a machine, a dirty, smoke-belching beast that seemed alive because of the way it stalked, hunted, and toyed with its prey. Audiences didn't need to see the driver, the truck was the villain. It was faceless evil, relentless, unstoppable, the kind of terror that makes you glance in your rearview mirror just a little longer after leaving the theater. And while Duel gave us a faceless monster on wheels, our next villain car was just as terrifying, but it came with a face. A face of pure muscle, roaring through the streets of San Francisco in one of cinema's greatest chase scenes. When people talk about legendary car chases, Bullitt immediately comes to mind. Steve McQueen's Mustang usually gets all the glory, but the real villain on wheels was the 1968 Dodge Charger RT. Sinister, black, and loaded with raw V8 power, the Charger wasn't just a car, it was a force of nature. Its deep growl echoed through the streets of San Francisco as it tore through corners, jumped curbs, and left everything else in its dust. Every screeching tire, every near miss, made the audience's heart pound in sync with the engine. What made it terrifying wasn't just speed, it was aggression. Every movement felt intentional, like the car had a mind of its own. The Charger wasn't being chased by McQueen's character for fun, it was in the hands of a driver who knew how to use it. And that's the beauty of a villain car like this. It's unforgettable not because it's exotic or magical, but because it acts like a villain. Powerful, relentless, and unforgettable. But not every villain's downfall comes from speed. Some meet their doom through slow, crushing humiliation, and that brings us to one of the most comedic yet oddly satisfying bad guy cars ever. Not every villain car needs to inspire fear. Sometimes, it's all about watching the ego get crushed. Literally, take Sheriff Buford T. Justice in Smokey and the Bandit. His car of choice, the 1977 Pontiac Lemons. Slow, blocky, and completely outmatched by Burt Reynolds' Trans Am, the Lemons became a rolling symbol of his frustration. Every chase ended with his car battered, bruised, and humiliated, and with it, his dignity shattered alongside the crumpled fenders. The genius of this villain car isn't in speed or menace, it's in comic storytelling. The Lemons transforms the sheriff's obsessive pursuit into slapstick agony. Audiences can't help but laugh as the car, like its driver, slowly collapses under the weight of its own ambitions. And yet, even destroyed, the Lemons leaves a mark. It's a villain that audiences remember, not for power, but for the chaos it endured, and the chaos it caused. But while the Pontiac Lemons fell apart, some villain cars didn't crumble. They became legends, commanding attention every time they appeared on screen. Not all villain cars are terrifying or tragic. Some are just cool in the most over-the-top, rebellious way possible. Enter Kid Rock's 1979 Pontiac Trans Am in Joe Dirt. This wasn't a car built for subtlety or fear. It was loud, brash, and dripping with attitude, the perfect reflection of a wannabe villain's personality. Every rev of its engine, every gleaming detail screamed swagger and defiance. The car didn't just belong to a character, it defined him. What made the Trans Am memorable wasn't its speed or danger, it was charisma. A bad guy doesn't always have to inspire terror to leave a mark. Sometimes, they leave one simply by being unforgettable, and the Trans Am did exactly that. But sometimes, villain cars were deadly serious. Cars that made even James Bond pause and reconsider his strategy. Even James Bond has to respect a well-chosen villain car. In Diamonds Are Forever, the 1974 Thunderbird drove into cinematic history not as a hero's gadget, but as a villain's instrument of intimidation. Bunky Beak Bird, a sinister Bond villain, used the Thunderbird with chilling precision. Its brown, brutalist exterior perfectly matched the cold efficiency of its owner. And when the car was used to trap Agent 007 in the trunk, it proved that even an unassuming car could feel threatening, a rolling extension of menace itself. The Thunderbird wasn't flashy or exotic. It didn't need neon lights or chandeliers. Its power lay in subtlety, in the way it made you uneasy just by being there. And that's a key quality for a truly memorable villain car. It doesn't always need to roar. Sometimes it just needs to make your skin crawl. But if subtle menace worked for Bond villains, nothing screams cinematic villainy quite like the apocalyptic muscle of Mad Max's world. In a post-apocalyptic world, a villain's car isn't just a ride, it's a symbol of survival, power, and chaos. Enter the Ford Falcon XP Interceptor from Mad Max. Though Max is technically the hero, many of the iconic villain gangs made this car terrifying. Black, aggressive, and brutal, the Interceptor became the ultimate machine of menace, prowling the wastelands with unmatched ferocity. Its sleek lines and roaring engine were only part of the story. The Interceptor was modified for destruction, a weapon on wheels that could dominate anyone foolish enough to cross it. What made it unforgettable wasn't just speed or power, it was the aura of fear it carried. Just seeing the Interceptor emerge from a cloud of dust made enemies and audiences tense. Every chase, every screeching tire, every collision cemented its place as one of the most iconic villain vehicles in cinema. And if Mad Max gave us apocalyptic muscle, the next her shows us that villains can also embody chaos in ways far stranger than engines and horsepower alone. Some villains don't need one iconic car, they need an army of chaos on wheels. The Joker in The Dark Knight turned ordinary vehicles into instruments of anarchy. Clown-themed trucks barreling through Gotham streets, his cars weren't just transportation, they were extensions of his madness. Each vehicle reflected his unpredictable personality, colorful, loud, and completely uncontrollable. Civilians feared not just the Joker himself, but the rolling chaos that followed wherever he went. The brilliance of these cars lies in their unpredictability. You never knew exactly what he would do next. Would a truck explode? topple a street, or crush everything in its path. The vehicles became characters in their own right, carrying the Joker's signature style of fear, surprise, and destruction. And while Gotham's streets were filled with chaos, some villain cars earned their place in history simply by being the ultimate bully on screen. Not all villain cars are about terror or destruction. Sometimes they're about intimidation in the simplest, most relatable way. Biff Tannen's 1946 Ford Super Deluxe in Back to the Future is a perfect example. Boxy, heavy, and unmistakably aggressive, this classic Ford wasn't flashy or fast. It was menacing simply because of who drove it. Every roll down the street reminded Marty McFly and the audience that Biff owned the road, and by extension, the neighborhood. The car's presence amplified his bullying personality, making him feel unstoppable without needing any supernatural powers or weapons. Biff's Ford proved that a villain car doesn't always have to perform jaw-dropping stunts or tear through city streets. Sometimes all it needs is presence, character, and a driver willing to use it as an extension of their intimidation. And with that, we come to a conclusion that spans decades, genres, and cinematic styles. Villain cars aren't just machines, they're extensions of their drivers, reflections of personality, and sometimes characters in their own right. From Christine's Haunted Fury to Stuntman Mike's Death-Proof Nova, from the Cadillac Fleetwood's gaudy throne to the relentless Peterbilt in Duel, each car tells a story beyond the driver behind the wheel. Some intimidate with speed, some terrify through chaos. Some command respect through sheer presence. And some even make us laugh at their inevitable downfall. What's remarkable is how these vehicles stay with us long after the movie ends, the way a car can haunt our memory, much like the villains who drove them. So, which bad guy car left the biggest mark on you? Was it the precision of the Ronin BMW, the madness of the Joker's trucks, or the relentless menace of Mad Max's Interceptor? Drop your pick below, and if we missed one, it might just feature in our next countdown. Remember, in the world of cinema, sometimes the real villain isn't the person you see on screen. It's the car that drives them to do terrible, unforgettable things.